And we're going to introduce our keynote speaker. His name is Bill Snowball. He worked for NASA for 9 years on the Apollo projects as mission control. He has graciously come in to give a presentation today. So I would like you all to give him a lovely round of applause as he approaches the talk.
Wow, I feel like I'm at home. I was an engineer and I loved math and loved science, and I got to do it for a while. Back a long time ago, I graduated from NC, went to the University of Wyoming. I majored in aeronautical engineering, which at that time was an option of mechanical, and I got really lucky. I was a senior. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was applying to places like Boeing, Lockheed. Fraternity brother actually called me from Houston. He had been down there for a couple of years. And he asked me if I wanted to come to Houston and put men on the moon. I was pretty smart. I said, yeah, that's better than building wings, right? So I got very, very lucky. I got into the best division in all of NASA, which was flight control. I got into the best section in flight control, which was flight dynamics. And I got to be a fighter. There were 9 of us who trained to be flight dynamics officers. 7 of us were actually on the console during the history of the Apollo program. The front row of the control center was called the trench. And the fighter was in the middle, the Rex Fire officer was over here, the guidance officer over here. That was the flight dynamics branch. My job was basically our job was to get the crew everywhere they wanted to go and back again. We had to monitor the vehicle during launch phase to make sure it stayed in a safe trajectory. Once it got into orbit, then our job was to compute all the maneuvers from the Earth orbit stuff to Apollo, deep space, rendezvous from the 2 guys who went to the moon. A big job was getting them back to the command module, which was boring holes in the sky waiting for them to come off the surface of the moon. That was a huge job, and that's the one that I specialized in essentially almost my entire career. I flew every rendezvous from Apollo 12 on, clear through the Skyline program and the SVP program. It was a fabulous job. You couldn't train for that job in college. You could do engineering stuff and learn how to maybe think like an engineer, but we were basically trained at Houston in classes and then in the control center with simulations, hours and hours and hours of simulations. We had people who did nothing but throw problems at us, trying to get us to learn to react, to improvise. And if I did 1,000 hours in the control center in real time during the Apollo missions, then I probably did 10,000 hours of simulations. The simulation process is probably what enabled us to get Apollo 13 successfully back to Earth. Most of you probably have seen the movie Apollo 13, which is the only reason you even know we had an Apollo program. But Apollo 13 was truly just thinking on your feet because things just didn't turn big. I don't consider 13 to be our biggest success. I think some of the later missions, maybe even Apollo 17, which is our last flight, was maybe our biggest success because we just kept getting better and better and better. We used more and more equipment. We used more and more experiments from the command. We just filled up there every minute of every day with science, and it was truly an incredible program. Going back, people call it the space race, okay? And truly, it was. It's a space program. You can really trace the roots back to World War II. The Germans took their best, brightest engineers, and they sequestered them into a special secret spot called Pina Mundi, and they began to develop rockets. And that's the V1 and the V2, which they then flew over and bombed London for the whole period of the war. close of the war, Russia was coming down Monday this way, and we were coming up this way, and these German engineers said, you know, what are we going to do? We're going to go to America, or we're going to go to Russia? And the cream of the crop said, we're going to America. So they came out and surrendered to the Americans. The others went north and surrendered to the Russians. Those were the two groups of human beings that created the rockets that we use and that Russia used in what became then a race. Russia put the first man in space, they put everything first. They kept kicking our butt every time we turned around. John Kennedy, I think it was during his inaugural address, said, we are going to go to the moon, we're going to beat the Russians to the moon, and we're going to do it in this decade. And that was huge, because by then we were maybe getting ready to put a dog in space. So the 1960s really sort of defined the start of the whole space race. And for a long, long time, it appeared that we weren't going to be the first. We did have one incredible German scientist named Werner von Braun. And he began to develop the missiles that were going to put men in space and subsequently put men and equipment to the moon. In my experience, by far the greatest single thing ever done in science was the Saturn V rocket. The Saturn V rocket was incredible, and it was all one rocket. He was an incredible man. He and his fellow scientists, after we got them from Monday, we sequestered them in their own little place in Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. And most of them lived there for a long, long, long time. Their descendants still live there. And that's where they developed the missiles that became our launch vehicles and our booster rockets. The first program was Mercury. Mercury was the original 7 astronauts that you know of, some of which are still alive. Its sole purpose was to put men in the Earth and bring it back. 6 flights, I believe, very successful. No catastrophic damage. We just stumbled right into the Gemini program. The Gemini program was designed, okay, now we know we can get into space. Let's see what we can do in space. How many days can we stay in space? How do we survive up there for 10, 12, 14 days? We began to develop the rendezvous techniques with the spacecraft and making one of their used launch vehicles. And that started, I think, Gemini was 63 kind of time frame, 63, 65. The Apollo program was supposed to kick off in winter of 1967, which I was in school that learned. But again, we were in a race, we were hurrying, we were doing things without a lot of fear, without a lot of planning. And they were testing the Apollo 1 vehicle at the Cape in a pure oxygen environment. Everything's loaded up just like it's going to launch. Spark happened inside the capsule. The oxygen exploded, killed the crew, and it was really the first space tragedy, if you will. And what it did for me was it delayed Apollo for almost 2 years. And it was during that 2-year period that I went to Houston and started getting all my training. As a fighter, you needed to know about engines and how they work, and engine health, and guidance system, accelerometers, and quickers, and backup accelerometers. You had to understand orbital dynamics, how you run the two vehicles in space. It was tremendous learning. And at the end of that 2 years, I felt like I was pretty much ready to go system-wise. I understood the job. And then it's just a matter of getting in there and letting the simulation people beat your brains out. My first flight was Apollo 10. I worked in the front room. I was planning FIDO, if you will. I was also the fighter who got to do the lead role, which meant I got to play with the mission rules and go to all the meetings and get visibility and credibility. And it just started what was for me a wonderful career. Apollo 13, I was 30 years old, looked like I was 12. And at one point in time, I was standing up, explaining to the world how we were going to do this unguided maneuver to get the vehicle back into the corridor, which was our job. And I look up and the viewing room is just filled with astronauts and their wives and their kids and vice presidents, and I'm going, oh my God, these people are just looking, who is this kid? It was quite a job. It was very fun. I started to expand my roles in late Apollo, like Apollo 15. From then on, I was flying launch phase and launching the vehicle from the Cape. And that was probably our most demanding role, because we had an abort switch on the booster flight director. And we could actually throw that switch if it thought that the vehicle went into the wrong area in the trajectory. And that would light the spacecraft, and given any other symptom, the crew would abort the mission. And that was a really tough switch to touch. I didn't like to do it pre-launch just to see it work. There's a lot of responsibility, and it was a lot of fun. The sad thing to me now is that we don't really have a space program anymore. We've mothballed the shuttles, and we want to go up to the space station. We got to go to Russia and get on one of those rotten vehicles of theirs and go up to the space station, and it's just really sad. NASA was always a goal-oriented group. We went from Mercury to Gemini to Apollo to the ASTP program with Russia, then to the early phases of the shuttle, and then to the late phases of the shuttle, and then we survived the Challenger accident in the Columbia. Very resilient group of people. We still, in fact, my group has just written a book. It's a compilation of chapters, and each one was added, or supposed to be added to this book. It's called From the Trench of Mission Control to the Craters of the Moon, I think. And it's on Amazon. But it's interesting. It's a 9 to 12 guys' perspective on what we did. About half of us are still alive. About half of them weren't. Guys I flew with, a couple of guys were World War II fighter pilots that became flight controllers. I was basically the last person hired in flight control, so I was the Navy of the group, if you will. My flight director, Gene Crane, is the main flight director, the head of the flight control division. He wrote a book. He was one of the first ones to jump on a book called Failure is Not an Option. Gene was made famous by the movie Apollo 13 because Scott Harris played him, and Scott Harris is the best actor in the movie. Glenn Lundy, who was my supervisor initially, was probably the best flight director, but the guy who played him was a crummy actor, so they cut all his scenes. So Kranz became famous with his white vest and all that stuff. And he's still around down there. Chris Kraft, Glenn Lundy, there's some of the greatest men that ever walked the face of the earth, science-wise, are still alive and doing well in that Houston area. The rest of us are spread all over. But anyway, it was a great adventure for me. Started at the University of Wyoming, and I came back here in '76. My father died, and I began a business career, which is nearly as fun, but it pays better. So anyway, I had some stuff that I was going to do about Apollo 13, but we're not going to have time. Senator Brasso couldn't come and do this, but I was a fill-in. Thank you for your attention. If you want to do a quick question, or I can, or if you want to get on with your program, which will be good.